I'm a big fan of the M1 Carbine, and I love the little 30 caliber M1 Carbine round. In fact, this is one of my favorite plinking guns, and I'll take it over an AR-15 any day of the week. But probably 5 years ago, I bought a big batch of foreign-made ammunition that was made in Southeast Asia that I got a super deal on. And it ended up really not being a very good deal because the ammo had a real problem. And that problem resulted in blowing out my gas chamber on the rifle and ruining the barrel and making me have to rebarrel it. And because of that problem, it has kind of dominated my reloading efforts on this gun for the last 5 years. Alright, so here's the problem that I had. This is the dimensions of a 30 caliber M1 Carbine round. And as you can see, it should be 1.290 inches maximum case length, right? And you can see if you're reading the fine print here, the trim length for this, for reloading, is 1.280, though some other books will give it as 1.285. A little bit bigger. So we want to trim it somewhere below 1.290 and no smaller than 1.280. Now the problem I ran into with this East Asian ammo, which I'll show you some right here. I got like 1,000 of these things, right? Is the actual case itself was too long. And that was a real problem. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, so here's a brand new box of MagTech 30 caliber M1 Carbine. I'll just open it up and I'm going to pull one of these babies out. So, brand new MagTech round. I'm going to put it in a collet. And I'm going to put that in an inertial bullet puller. And I'm going to knock that right out of here. Got a good crimp. Alright, so let's get that out. I'll reuse everything here, so I'll drop the bullet in that thing. Powder won't go into the cases again, obviously, but it'll get sprinkled over the lawn, makes a great fertilizer. So here we are, MagTech case. I take my calipers and let's pop it on here. Alright, so that is 1.285 or 855. Okay, and that probably stretched a little bit when I pulled it out, but that's a good case. That'll fire every time. Alright, now we've got one of these Southeast Asian manufactured rounds. Now I'm going to pop that in the collet and put that in the kinetic bullet puller. A little bit easier to pull out. Alright, we'll open that up once again. Bullet goes in the cup, powder goes in that cup, and let's get the calipers. Okay. In that case is 12945, which is quite oversized. And the problem I ended up having with my rifle is that these things vary widely. Some of them are fine. Toss that in there. In fact, let me get here's one. That's another one of those. Okay. 1.2895. So that one was okay. So the other one was quite big. These things were all over the ballpark. Some of them were within spec. Some of them were slightly outside of spec. And I've had some that went as high as 1.30. Right, so what happened with my rifle is the ones that were within spec, they would shoot fine. The ones that were wildly out of spec, they would misfire because the bolt would close, but it wouldn't fully lock, and therefore the firing pin would not strike. So I thought I was getting weak primers or something like that. Didn't know. I'd eject it out, shoot another one, maybe it'd go off, maybe it wouldn't. My real problem happened with the ones that were just slightly oversized, because what happened with them is the edge of the brass would get forced past the chamber in the rifle barrel, and then it would fire, and of course the brass would actually be a little bit in the bore, which would cause an overpressure situation, and that ended up blowing out my gas cylinder eventually, which was no fun at all. Right? I had to get the gun rebarreled, which cost me about $500. So I had all this ammo that I could not use, and I had even more of it then. I had a bit over 1,000 rounds of this stuff. So the answer was obviously to break it down and trim the cartridge cases down. And that was just such a tedious project. I mean, of course, you got to break them down with this. There's nothing to speed that up. But the trimming was bad. But I finally came on a system that works better for me. I mean, it's still labor intensive, but it lets me get through these things fairly fast. And like I say, I reuse the bullets, I reuse the primers, I reuse the cases, and as a result, I'm able to put together plinking ammo from what would have been throwaway ammo. Would have been a total loss. So I'll show you my process. So this is my process for reclaiming the M1 Carbine loads. But it's the exact same process that I go through for reloading fired cases, with really just one difference. So you already saw that I break them down with a kinetic bullet puller, and that takes a long time. But the next long pole in my tent had always been trimming the cases. And I've tried a number of different case trimming regimens over the years, and they all work, but they're all wicked slow, and they have a long setup time. So this is a system that I've started using. I've been playing around with it, and I think I've got it down pat. So for M1 carbines, I use a turret press, Lee turret press to load. So here's my typical M1 carbine turret setup. And you'll notice that the sizing die hole is empty. So I have a second M1 carbine turret, and for this one all I do is trim and size. So basically what I have are two trim dies in here, and I've got the capping pins removed, the decapping pins. And if I was doing fired cases, I would just put those back in. But right now, I've got about 700 of these already primed cases, you know, to size and get ready. So that is a sizing die. This is a Lee Easy Trim die. And this system is composed of two parts. There is the cutter on a crank, and this is generic, so you only need to buy one of these. And then each cartridge has a specific trim die that's used for that one. So this is the 30 caliber M1 Carbine trim die. And you know, this is not instantaneous, but it's so much faster than any other system I've used. And when I started off, I just had one sizing die and one trim die. But you know, it is a 4-hole turret, so I was just cycling through 2 empty holes to do the next case. And I thought that was a waste of time. So I bought a new trim die body and a new sizing die body, and that allows me to make every pull of the lever productive. So it's pretty simple. I'm going to take a lubed cartridge case, and I lube them with One Shot case lube. Put it in a box and spray them. And I'm going to run that up in the sizing die. I'm going to swing it around to the trim die. Now I'm going to take the cutter and put it in. Like I said, this is not instantaneous, but still faster than anything else I've ever done. Put a little pressure on the handle. Turn this. Now, because these have to be trimmed quite a bit, I give it a good turn. When I'm doing an already fired case, I give it maybe like 4 or 5 rotations. That's all it takes. Knock out the chips, and it is trimmed. And the light's not going to be good in here, the way I'm filming, or I would show you my calipers, what it's reading. But these are reading about 1.283, which is just fine. And that's it. And every time I turn the handle, I'm ready to go. So now I'm ready to use my second set sizing. Trim. Put the cutter in. I can feel that this one was a high one. Out the shavings, and we're good to go. And really, that is all it takes. I'm just going to finish off the last 3 here, and then we'll get into the finish reloading. Okay, now you've seen the way that I size and trim, and whether it's new brass, once fired brass, or this wacky Southeast Asian brass, I do exactly the same thing. As I said, the only difference is if it's fired brass, I would put the decapper pins back in. So now we're going to look at the way I handle the rest of the operation. So I've got my turret in, I've got the sizing die blank, but if this had been once fired brass, it would need to be primed. And I would have hung my primer right here. Oops. And I would be priming right on this stroke. So if it needed to be primed, I would run it up in here. I would have had my priming tool plunger right inside already. So if I was priming, I'd run it up. I would have picked up a primer, seated it and primed, and have been ready to go. But since I don't need to prime, just pull that off to make it easier for you to see. I'm going to go up, pick up powder. Now I'm using H110 powder, and I'm loading 14.5 grains. So this is the first one I'm throwing. I'm going to check it on my digital scale, and it looks good. So I'm going to put that back in. Yep, just going to double checking because my scale had to wake itself up. Alright, so 14.5 grains. Down we go. It rotates to the seating station. Put a bullet in, seat it, and over to the crimping station. And we are now good to go, finish round. And I'll just run right through the entire setup here. So I'm using my recycled bullets. I'm using primed cases that have been sized and trimmed. So the only thing that I'm expending right now is the powder. I'm using these bullets because this is plinking ammo. Right, these are jacketed, full jacketed, metal jacketed bullets. To make this a more effective round, I would have been loading jacketed soft point bullets. And that's what I use for anything I'm serious about using the M1 Carbine for, but most of what I do with it is plinking. So I go through a lot of hardball. So recycling this stuff is really the smartest thing for me to do. It's labor intensive, but when you got almost 1,000 rounds of this stuff to break down, you might as well put it to use. That's a lot of money for ammo. So that's my process, and it's been working out pretty well for me. 2 turrets. You can do the same thing on a Dillon progressive press. The only real problem is because that's so much higher, you're turning the crank way up here. But you can do the same thing, you just need to use 2 tool heads, so it gets a little more expensive, but it works out. So if you've got M1 carbine ammo, especially if you got a bunch of junk stuff to break down, but even if you don't, because they all need to be trimmed. If you fire them, you got to keep them trimmed. Eventually they'll get long enough to cause you a problem, and if it costs you a barrel like it did me, it's just not worth it. Much better to bite the bullet and set up a setup like this to size and trim them and just keep everything in spec. Alright, so have fun shooting. Well, I'm out here at the range with the M1 carbine just to function test the ammo that we just made, make sure it goes bang every time, doesn't blow up the gun. So let's see how we did. I'd say it's working fine.